Hi there, my name is Abigail and you're welcome to this week's edition of Come on the Go. Sorry about last week, I was a little below the weather and so I couldn't present the show as scheduled. Today we'll continue our discussion on faint forms. First time we talked about this, we looked at prepositions and we talked about how you should say prepositions in their faint forms in order to achieve that fluidity that comes with speaking English. Today we move on to conjunctions. We'll be looking at 5 different conjunctions and we'll be looking at the weak forms of these 5 different conjunctions and how you should say them. The conjunctions are for, from, and, as, but. Those are the conjunctions in these strong forms. Now the question is, when you use them in speech, do you say them in their strong forms? Remember, we've said this before, that when you are saying words that occur in their weak forms, you do not usually say them in the loud or strong forms. That's because it would make your speech sound unnatural or not authentic. If you want to sound authentic in English, then you must apply the principle of weak forms or faint forms when you're speaking. So what are the faint forms of these words? We'll look at the faint forms now, and then we'll look at them in sentence environments. For, the weak form is f. From, the weak form is frum. And, the weak form is und or un. As, the weak form is us. But, the weak form is but. So now let's take a look at these words in sentences. For, remember the weak form is f. Go for it. Go for it. From, remember the weak form is from. It went from bad to worse. It went from bad to worse. From bad to worse. And remember I said 2 weak forms. We'll be using the un form in this word. I want some bread and butter. And I want you to take note that when we're talking about compounds, that's words that occur together, like bread and butter, tea and bread, bag and shoe. You always use the form for and. You don't say the and. You don't, for instance, say fish and chips. Rather, you say fish and chips. So the form is usual when you're talking about things that go together. All right? Then we move on to the next, as. The weak form is us. And we have the sentence, you can have it as well. You can have it as well. Finally, we have but, and the weak form is but. And the sentence, I can't but answer his question. I can't but answer his question. So the point to note here is that when we're talking weak forms, or when you're using these words, these conjunctions, you must always use them in their weak forms. You should try as much as possible to learn how to say them in their weak forms and always make use of the weak or faint forms when you're speaking. Well, that's not all for today. Right after the break, we'll talk about 1 or 2 un-English expressions and why they're un-English. Stay with me. Welcome back and welcome to this segment of Come on the Go. We will be talking about certain expressions, things we say, which we really shouldn't. Some might refer to them as un-English expressions, or we could talk about non-standard expressions. So we're looking at these expressions and we're going to talk about why they are wrong or why we shouldn't use them. But first we'll be looking at is round up versus round off. Round up versus round off. Now, what's the difference in usage between those two? You may have heard people say, we shall round up the meeting at about 4 p.m. Well, that's wrong. You don't round up meetings. You actually use round up when you're talking about gathering things together. For instance, the animals have traveled far and wide, maybe you're a cattle rearer, and then you want to round up the animals. You want to round up the cattle, or you want to round up the chicken and send them back into their cage. Then you use round up. But for something like a meeting, which you want to end at a particular time, you use the expression round off and not round up. So I hope you get that. Now the next two expressions that we're going to talk about has to do with the way we introduce ourselves. You may have heard a couple of people say, my names are, and then they insert their names. For instance, I may want to introduce myself, and I say my names are Abigail Chinatu Mpocha, or Abigail Chinatu Anaba, or whatever. Now, when you use expressions like my names are, you're actually wrong, because the word name refers to a word or group of words by which a person is identified. A word or group of words by which a person is identified. That's what the word name means. So you shouldn't say my names are, you should say my name is, even if the group of words that you're using to identify yourself is 5 or 6. As long as it's a word, a group of words that you're using to identify yourself, then you say my name is and not my names are. I hope you get that. Then the last one we'll take today has to do with introductions to. You may hear someone introducing himself and he says, my name is Mr. Say Mr. Kenneth. My name is Mr. Kenneth, or I am Mr. Joe. Now, when it comes to introductions, it's best if you do not include a title when you're talking about yourself. It sounds pretentious, like you're placing yourself in a particular pedestal. Humility requires that you do not attach titles except for a very good reason. You attach a title, perhaps someone is dying and you're rushing over to take care of the person, and you could say, I am a doctor. I mean, just to put the person at ease. But if someone is not dying, there is really no reason why you should be introducing yourself using a title, whatever the title is. So it's better that you just give your name, first names mostly, or your last name, whichever you feel more comfortable with. So when you meet me, you should know my name is Abigail. I wouldn't tell you I am a Mr. or a Mrs. or a Miss. You should keep your titles to yourself, unless it's absolutely necessary that you use the titles. So that's it on this segment of Come on the Go. I'll be right back, and then we'll take one more tip, a question which might actually lead to your winning something. How about that? And then we'll call it a day on Come on the Go today. Don't go away. That's it on Come on the Go today. Remember, we started off by talking about feigned forms of words, and we paid attention to feigned forms of conjunctions, and then we concluded by talking about un-English expressions, some non-standard expressions that we need to avoid. Well, here's a chance for you to win something off Come on the Go. Why don't you be the first person to comment and tell us what you learned from Come on the Go today? The best answer, or the first answer, wins something of Come on the Go. You'd like to know what it is? Well, why don't you answer the question and then you'll find out. Thank you very much for joining me today. Join me again next week.